Hey everybody, Professor Reed here. Wanted to put this up as a guide to MLA, just some snapshots. Now, hopefully this is a big review for you. I'm putting this up for all my classes, various schools, various levels. MLA is a little tricky. If you've ever used APA, stands for American Psychological Association. That's got its, it's basically the same concept as MLA. MLA stands for Modern Language Association, primarily in English classes, but it's going to be a standardization that occurs across the board for various things in a paper. So, for example, you can see here the fonts, 12-point fonts, the margin, the headers, the heading you're going to put at the top left page on any type of paper or document that you're going to write in MLA. So you put your name, you put my name, you can put Professor Reed, you can put the class number there, and then you write the date in the British style. So you put it in the actual date first, then the month, then the year. Okay, so that's going to be, MLA as an idea. It's a governing body for the paper. Now, MLA also makes changes in regards to what is acceptable, not acceptable. I know last year they released a new version, and the singular usage of they was added to it as amongst other things. Okay, so MLA is going to be something that is the guiding body for the way you're going to put your papers together. Um, in addition, it creates rules about things like works cited pages, which I'm going to hope is a big review for everybody. And then a little bit trickier is going to be in-text citation, and we'll talk about that in this lecture. Very good. Now, a lot of times students will sort of play this balancing act with a paper. What do they have to source? What do they have to tell where it came from? I would say if you're in doubt, make sure you put that your source material where it came from. Okay, even if you do summarize it or paraphrase it, you want to make sure you put it you want to reference where it came from because somebody could object to that, or we may doubt the information, want to find out where it's from, and it's the biggest way of preventing plagiarism, which is something that a lot of times is going to occur sort of accidentally in a paper. Okay, so uh, when you get a piece of data of information, we talked about different types of information, how you're going to get that in the paper. Make sure that you cite the information. Okay. Now, if you have something that's pretty known fact, there's no need to cite that. But if it's something that is going to be critical, statistical base, or going to be something that comes from a source, even if you paraphrase it, you're going to want to make sure that you uh, put that information into the works cited page and into the in-text citation. All right, good. Now, in-text citation is going to be something that's a little bit trickier. Now, works cited, we'll talk about in a minute. That's going to be the document that occurs at the end of the paper. It's going to be a list of where you got your source material from. And if you've ever used something like EasyBib or you've used something like Google Scholar has an option for it, Penn State, Widener, Jefferson University, the schools I teach at, their databases have the ability for you to go into a source and then to actually um, take that source material and copy and paste it into the MLA works cited page. Now you want to double check that. A lot of times students are going to copy and paste that and sort of trust it. Just double check it because you could lose a few points for that. If you ever use something like Citation Generator or EasyBib, which is popular a couple years ago, you'll see that that's going to be something that creates the works cited page for you. Okay, so in-text citation is a little bit different. In-text citation, there's some components that Microsoft Word has into it, but basically it's going to be something that you're going to create. The work cited page is linked to the in-text citation. Now, you do not want to put uh, the text of your works cited page in alphabetical order. I mean, you want to put it in alphabetical order, not how it appears in the paper. That's sometimes a mistake students make. And that's going to be one of those things that we're going to try to catch when we do any type of peer review of the paper or when I read the paper. Okay. Now, if you've ever done this before, it's a little bit of review. You may have had a teacher, professor, or somebody tell you that you have something called the signal phrase. So in this example here with the in-text citation, that text there, bestial, that's the name of the writer, suggests that large numbers of manuscripts shows that work was popular and widely read in the 16th century. Page 92. Bestial there is going to be something called the signal phrase. Okay, so if you have a signal phrase, it's basically going to tell you where that information came from. Okay, so then I could flip to the back and look and see the author's name, and I could double check the source material if I thought it was plagiarized, or if I just wanted to check it out. Okay, so if you put the name of the writer into the sentence, you basically don't then have to put the writer's name at the end of the sentence. Okay, so the in-text citation is going to be it's also called the parenthetical citation. It's going to be the page number where the information came from. And if you put the writer's name in the sentence, like in the first example there, you put the quote, then you don't need to put the writer's name at the end in the in-text citation. Okay. Now the second one, they just took the same exact quote. They did not put the writer's name there, and they had to add that into the parentheses into the in-text citation with the page number. And you will notice that the period goes outside of the text. Okay, so like you basically treat it as part of the sentence. Okay, so in the last two examples, you have paraphrases of the information, and we'll talk about paraphrasing a little bit more in the future. Even though you do paraphrase it, you want to say where it came from. So bestial, you put the name of the writer there in the actual paraphrase. You're not quoting it. You're taking the information and sort of putting it in your own. You're changing the words around, changing the word order around. You've done something called a paraphrase. You still want to tell where it came from, because technically, if you don't do that, that's a form of plagiarism. Okay. Now, in the next example, the writer put the name of the person that paraphrased it put the name of the writer in the parenthetical or the end text citation. Okay, so you can mix this up sort of stylistically how you want to do it. A lot of times students will say to paraphrase. In some of our essays, we are required to put a paraphrase in there. It's probably a good idea to be very explicit about it, because sometimes when you read it over, you're not sure where the paraphrase ends and where somebody else's thoughts begin. Okay, so in-text citation is going to be um, a little bit tricky. As we move through the semester, we'll see that there's going to be some sources you have that don't have a writer's name, or maybe they don't have a page number. There's different ways of handling that from an in-text citation standpoint. There's a lot of different variables that go into that. We want you to be familiar with that. But for this first lecture on MLA, we're just trying to focus on sort of the basics of it. If you look at like MLA, there's a ton of different sources that you could use. There's pieces of art, there's maps, there's going to be the classics like magazines articles, and also scientific articles or something from a website. However, there's going to be MLA has citation guides for interviews. It actually has a citation for memes, which is one of my favorite things to quote in some of these papers. Okay. All right, good. Now here's the works cited page. Hopefully this is just an overview for you. You can just see here the reason I chose this one. You can see that header Smith at the top. You want to, even though you are writing, say you're writing a 5-page paper, excuse me, the works cited page doesn't count as part of that 5 pages. However, you want to make sure that you put your name at the on the top there in the header, because that's one of the rules about MLA. You put your last name and then the page number. The works cited, remember we said that don't put it in order as they appear in the paper. Put it rather in the order of the writer's name in alphabetical order. Now, what's tricky about this and why I got this example here is you can see that some of these don't have an exact single writer's name, and you will also see that if there's multiple writers, if it's over this amount of writers, it's going to be et al. There's multiple variations for this, right? But there is a pecking order for this. And when you go into annotated bibliography, you have to create, answer some questions about it as well. You'll have to put the annotated bibliography in a paper, but you'll still do it in alphabetical order. Okay, so remember, works cited page, MLA. You can create this on EasyBib. You can also copy and paste it from Google. You'll be an MLA. Just make sure you put them at the end. You put them in alphabetical order because you can lose a few stupid points for that. All right, good. And here's just a little graphic that shows how basically the in-text citation leads us to the works cited page. Okay, and you can see here this is a little bit of an example that shows they're not in alphabetical order. They're in they're in alphabetical order. They're not in the order that they're found in the paper. Okay, so if I was reading the paper, I would sort of flip here to the back, and you can see that there's some examples with et al. Okay, that's going to be over a certain amount of writers, and you can see that leads back. You can also see an article that has no writer's name, that was singular and plural, page 16. You can see that there. You can also see two writers' names. You can see one that doesn't have a page number as well, and you can see another one at the bottom. There were 45, 46. Okay, so now one of the things to sort of keep in mind, this could be tricky. We have that signal phrase. We want to have a variety in terms of the papers, and I guess the way to think of it is works, in-text citation can be tricky. There is different factors that would influence the way you're going to go about recording the sources in the paper. Okay. Don't get yourself overwhelmed with that in the beginning. I would recommend if you write a paper, I mean, obviously, when you turn it in for a final draft, you want to make sure this is all done. Keep your sources. And then as you go through this is going to be probably one of the top 5 things that we look for as we go through when we try to make changes to your paper from that rough draft to the final draft, which I usually grade and give you a final, like a full grade on. Okay, so you want to make sure that you double check your sources, and then at the very least try to write them down, make a note of that, and remember works cited page, pretty straightforward. In-text citation, a little more complicated, and both have that sort of common theme that depending on the way the text is written or organized, there's going to be different ways of making reference to it. This signal phrase, which we'll talk about, you may have heard as something different, but the signal phrase is basically introducing the source material in the sentence of the actual text. Okay. All right, good. Now a little clarification on this. MLA sort of specifics. If you do have a quote and you use it, and you want to add a little bit of clarification to it, you want to put that in brackets. At the end of the semester, we'll have in a lot of the classes, I'm doing this for like multiple classes. Um, by the end of the semester, whatever class you're in, you'll want to be able to make usage of some of the more less common types of punctuation, apostrophes. You want to be able to make sure you can use dashes and slashes. Brackets are going to be something that you're going to use in MLA to add clarification for the information you're putting in there. Okay, so that second example there, his presidency JFK was often referred to as Camelot. Maybe the text you're quoting was referring to JFK earlier in the text, but you're just taking a smaller portion of it. Okay, so brackets are something you can put into a paper, and they're going to give clarification about the information, and it's gonna like there's rules for it, so put it into brackets. If you get a sentence that's choppy and you wanted to add something in there to make it a little more grammatically correct, you could do that as well. One of the things that you don't want to do though is try to put your opinion into a brackets. I don't think I've ever had anybody do that, but that's something that you want to make sure that you um, put your opinion into the following sentences. Okay, so adding in information into a quote, brackets. All right, good. Now, if you're going to do, if you're writing a smaller paper, we're going to recommend you don't do this. Something called block quoting. I want to say it is 4 lines of poetry, 5 lines of prose. If you use that, you're going to have to uh, indent and sort of tab everything over. You can see here the block quoting is shown with this quote here that's highlighted. You would tab over, you'd make it sort of its own paragraph, and that's if it goes over a certain amount of sentences. Now, in a paper that we're going to be writing, the majority of papers that we write, we don't want to have too many block quotes in it because we want to have a little bit of discussion about the actual source material. Now, um, you can see here now too, whoever the people that made MLA, they're great people. that make MLA. But one of the things you want to note is when you do block quoting, you indent it over here to the left side. You treat it as its own sort of paragraph. And you can see there with Anderson, that's the name of the writer that's in the parentheses there. When you do block quoting, that period goes from outside of Anderson, it would have gone after Anderson to now in the actual sentence. Okay, so you treat the parenthetical or the index citation as basically being outside of the quote. Very good. Now block quotation. Yeah, 4 lines. Omit you take off the quotation marks. You start the quote on a new line, and citation information comes after the closing punctuation. So just what we just got done talking about. Now, like I said, we're going to try to avoid that. I prefer you to take a quote and sort of break it up. Now, there's going to be some more complicated types of MLA questions that are going to occur. If you find a source in another source, you're going to want to try to find that. As we move forward in the semester, we're going to see invariably that every semester it's sort of funny, it's sort of interesting, but there is going to be a MLA question that comes up that I don't know the answer to. We're going to figure that out. Okay. I will say this. I think I mentioned this before. Try to get the papers done. Think of the MLA as going to be sort of that um, finishing touch that you want to put on the paper. It's got to have it. But I can sort of think of a sports analogy with this. If you ever played baseball, it's a very complicated rule based, or softball, a very complicated rule based type of sport. Definitely the rules apply, but you want to actually like start playing the game before you worry too much about the rules. But this is something that's going to happen at the end because one of the things we're trying to prevent is plagiarism. So if you have a paraphrase, if you have anything like that, make sure you put the citation in there. And if there are some citations for things that pieces of art, or I know the Bible has a certain way of being quoted or put into MLA citation as well. Just sort of be aware of that. Be aware of where to go for that, and you should be pretty safe. All right, and now we'll talk about this in the future. This is going to be an example of an annotated bibliography for multiple essays that we write in my multiple classes. Annotated bibliography is basically when you put a works cited page, on your works cited page you add in basically a summary about it. Now I give a specific set of questions about it. Professor A, instructor A, teacher A is going to do it different than teacher B, but basically you want to answer some questions, and you're going to take that information, the summary of the text, and you're going to put it below the works cited entry. And there's some rules about that. Okay, so annotated bibliography is going to be where you basically summarize the source material. You put that in there. Maybe we're not working on it for this specific essay that you're writing on now. We'll do a whole little lecture on how to do that specifically. But that shows like the different formatting for annotated bibliography. All right, good. And then just another example of it. Okay. All right, good. And I wanted, last time students have used APA, MLA, and there is just a little bit difference between the two formats. Um, there are some major difference between the two. Um, I I have worked with people on PhD dissertations or master's thesis, and they're going to use a lot of APA. APA has some specifics to it. MLA has its specifics to it. They are just the governing body of a paper. So if you're familiar with the concept, I think it's easy to sort of maneuver between the two.